Welcome to BIM Rules of Engagement. This is Rule 11, respect the digital differences. Now, if an individual, let's say, approached you and asked you, what is the digital culture of your company? Or maybe, is your company open source friendly? Or perhaps, are there software stereotypes within your organization? I think we know the answer to that. Most important, if someone had to answer the question, is the senior executives aligned with these new and improved digital ways of working? Now, in this digital age, I think it's critical we pay attention to the digital differences that are just as important, let's say, as things such as your WhatsApp policy updates. We can't assume that now that you are, let's say, a BIM manager, or for that matter, a BIM lead, that you're free to roam the corridors and align your teams with, let's say, the best and the greatest digital systems that are out there. We need to also start building relationships with external members from other disciplines. And we need to start looking out for the potential landmines, especially when it comes to how we receive as well as share information with third-party applications. And unfortunately, I think many professionals in our industry are still so focused on their digital way of working that they don't necessarily understand the digital process or even the methodologies outside of their own organization. And sometimes this could lead to fragmentation of collaboration, especially with other disciplines outside of the organization. And too many people often think now that you have a common data environment protocol in place, or you've implemented BIM standards, that this will now just pave the way to a successful project. Yet, this new digital age of working, I think it's time we start respecting the digital differences within other professional disciplines. It's time that we start to be more than just, let's say, tech savvy. You need to start being political savvy. From my experience, I've worked with several large as well as small design companies where I've seen, let's say, the BIM manager being tasked to ensure that internal teams operate correctly within their own design authoring software aspects. And let's say they manage and control and draft the BIM execution plan. If it was only that easy, I think we could just possibly all just get on with our jobs and hope that it would be a successful project. I'm also fully aware that there are many designers out there, or digital engineers, if you want to call them that don't yet understand the full role of a BIM execution plan. And that it should extend further than just seeing it as having the technical software guidelines for the project, and maybe making reference to a few ISO standards. You must remember, an architect's job is fundamental to the design, as well as sometimes help coordinate the project within different stages. But bear in mind, BIM is not just about design. It's also about the other stakeholders needing to evaluate the construction and maybe the performance of the built reality. And we all need to respect the fact that there will be digital differences on the project. We also need to respect the fact that there will be many companies that are built on legacy. And all too often, the use of other professional software on the project doesn't outweigh the vision of senior executives. So if you're managing a team, my advice would be to don't try to take control of the choices of project software used by other team members on the project, but rather try to understand the needs of the other professionals and what the output deliverable is that they require in order to help the team get the job done. Now, our mentor for this week is Justin Taylor, who works for Autodesk in London. Now, Justin, by all means, is a BIM alchemist and a fanatic of technological disruption.
As I begin this recording on respecting digital differences, the irony hasn't escaped me in terms of the personal choice of both the screen capture software and the video format that I'm using on this. You know, we've all got personal preferences and base our choices on factors such as ease of use, feature base, cost, brand loyalty, etc. So it's not surprising then that the digital choices we make can cause conflict when we look to align and collaborate with each other. As an industry, architecture, engineering and construction companies are in uncharted waters when it comes to digital technology and how it's transforming the industry and their businesses. Technological progress is inevitable and can offer significant benefits as we enter this new age of industrial revolution. But we've got to respect the digital differences between the companies. The convergence of different digital technologies is coalescing at the same time, and this trend is only going to tighten. If managed correctly, it's going to enable our industry and increase sustainability, enable new business models, and allow us to deliver better outcomes overall. I think this has been shown during the course of the year with the global pandemic of COVID-19. Restriction on the movement required companies to rapidly assess ways of and means of continuing their business and allowing their teams to work remotely from home. They needed solutions which could be adopted quickly and easily, as well as a solution which were, intuitive, so their users could onboard rapidly with minimal training. They're based at home; that you can't have the big training classes anymore. And the convergence of relatively low-cost broadband and cloud-based common data environments with high-performance laptops, etc., supported this almost overnight migration to remote working for many of the designers in the industry. BIM and digital maturity are without doubt hot topics across the AEC industry spectrum, but there's still a lot of confusion or even pushback when it comes to adoption. A common mistake is that BIM is 3D, for example, and the industry is prioritizing this over data. Maybe that's a result of how software was developed in the past, how it was marketed or sold, particularly during the 80s and 90s. Perhaps it's also partly due to the fact that BIM was targeted at the architects only to begin with. In my opinion, the industry should have started with construction, listening to what was actually required to build something safely, efficiently, sustainably, and cost-effectively. Then worked backwards. The problems companies face is further compounded by a growing digital divide. Now, most of us have heard of things like the maturity curves, where you have innovators, early adopters, you've got the early and late majority, and then finally the laggards. But how does that play out in our industry? Well, it's an interesting question. And even more intriguing when you work with organisations of every size and in every geo around the world. I've worked in the industry for a long time, long enough to remember the majority adoption of 2D CAD solutions, moving from the drawing board to the computer, compared to adopting BIM now and modern digital technologies. Moving to 2D CAD was a relatively simple process. Creation of drawings was fundamentally the same thing. It was just on a screen with a digitizer instead of with a set of rock ring pens and rulers, etc. But it was the evolution of the hardware which predominantly drove the adoption curve. Back in these days, systems ran on very expensive Unix hardware, painful to manage, very difficult. It was in my case anyway. It was only when the good old PC 386 DX62, or no, DX66 came out, do I remember the design office that I worked in really started providing CAD seats for all designers. The cost was driven down dramatically, and the adoption rose at the same rate. And the same was similar for printing. I remember the transition from the painful and slow, although not slow compared to 2D drawing manually, but the old pen plotters moving to the large format inkjets. Those were glorious heady days. But now, look where we are today. Technology develops at an exponential rate, and with that comes a whole range of governing factors on whether an organisation will adopt or not, or at what point will they adopt. These include cost of procurement, cost of ownership, life cycle maintenance, all of that kind of stuff, upgrading, training the users, whether the system will even be supported in a couple of years' time. Take software and two different types of companies. Let's say the first one has version 2.0 of whatever software we're talking about, and it does a pretty good job. It does what they want it to do. So the argument stands as to why should they incur upgrade costs? Why should they make a change when it's doing what they want it to do? The drawing board did what we all wanted to do back in the 80s. It allowed you to draw. So why is there a need to upgrade? Maybe you have to upgrade the hardware and provide extra upskilling to the trainers and users as well is a factor. Now the second company comes along and says, well, if we had these features and tools, we could work faster and be more productive. So they choose to do the upgrade, they opt in. The question is, are either wrong in their decision? And the answer isn't as simple as it may first seem. There are many factors which govern this. Firstly, you would have to put the brakes on anything to do with technology. If you were going to make this choice, there would have to be a global stop of advancement. Why? Well, for one thing, hardware and design software and operating systems are intrinsically linked. So it means that a software developer would need to support every previous version on every piece of hardware and on every version of the operating system. Okay, that's just never going to be a viable business solution or business model. So while some companies may wish to remain on a certain version with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality, they will eventually be driven forward either through not being able to collaborate, incompatible file versions, or through operating systems that no longer support their software. Maybe they had to do a rebuild or whatever it is, and they can no longer license the operating system, etc. They will, though, often be lagging behind a few versions, as it were. A lot of companies sort of do this. They hang back a version or two, jump into the latest releases every couple of years. Some prefer to maintain at a constant rate of advancement. They make use of the new features and tools as they come out. Either way, this causes or can cause a digital divide and incompatibility. Okay, and that's just with let's talking design software, not even to mention like common data environments and kind of VR systems being used or whatever it is. It's the same story. And this divide is not just between different companies, it's often within the same company. Organizations can be zoned into layers and levels of BIM technology adoption, and their size is not always what determines the speed at which they adopt BIM methodologies and technology. The digital divide is unequal across these layers and levels, and large organizations often utilize technologies across the BIM maturity levels depending on the specific project circumstances. Good example with joint ventures. You're working with multiple different companies and you're trying to align on what is the route to go forward with, minimal viable product, I guess. Another factor is the sheer number of solutions which are on the marketplace these days. Advances in manufacturing and programming, etc., have led to an explosion of applications in the AC market. Just think how the introduction and rise of the mobile phone has improved communication on construction sites over the last few decades. We went from receiving a call via a landline in a site office, if we're lucky, and then walking around the site trying to find that person because no idea where they are. Maybe you had walkie-talkies, but being able to contact them directly via a mobile phone now has speeded up this whole process. And now these people are equipped with smartphones, which not only can they be instantly contacted, but it allows them to access the latest drawings, complete checklists, raise non-conformance records, etc., etc. And all of this fits in the back pocket. So in my head, it's an obvious no-brainer to adopt, but you've got to think of the bigger picture and respect this digital divide. So take a project such as HS2. Okay, High Speed Rail 2. It's a large UK infrastructure project, estimated to create 20,000 approximate engineering and construction jobs during its lifetime. 20,000. Okay, this is a multi-stage, multi-contractor joint venture, which will require I don't know how many subcontractors and overall employees in the complete supply chain. Each at a potential different level of digital maturity, different software platform, different versions, different common data environments, making it not such a common data environment, but all of this has to be integrated in some way and they have to come together and collaborate. Go back to the days of the drawing board, it was a piece of paper that you handed over and passed around and some notes. Now we've got digital technology driving efficiencies forward, but at the same time it's creating this divide, this communication divide, because of all the divergence and the differences that it brings to the table. So if someone is still walking around and completing a quality checklist on paper, whilst your team is reviewing something in mixed reality, say, can you penalise them for not using the same digital technologies as you and force their hand? No. You can't, but it's not to say you can't specify what deliverables should be, and in what format. Different conversation to this one, but there is nothing to stop them going back to the site office and entering that paper checklist, the information contained in it, into a spreadsheet and then emailing that to you. You know, it's getting the information into a digital format. Is it efficient? No. Accurate? Probably not. I would imagine it carries a significant risk of error creeping in if you're retyping stuff. But if it's delivered in the way that's specified in the EIR or the BEP, BIM execution plan, it could still align, you know. For me, I feel that all companies, all BIM and VDC managers, etc., should be operating on a minimum technology level so as to avoid the fragmentation and pitfalls we currently experience on today's projects. I think that both software developers need to ensure that their applications can be integrated with other solutions. I think that's critical. For example, common data environments need to have APIs, these application programming interfaces. Okay, this allows separate environments to talk to each other and allow information to flow easily between them. Okay, it's a must-have. We are not all going to be, for example, on the same common data environment, but it's critical that the information can be shared between them without having to manually pull it down and manually re-upload it. And I think that's what the developers, you know, need to make sure of, that whatever digital technology is being used, it can integrate. The same is true for site tools, which capture checklists, RFIs, and issues. APIs allow hundreds of third-party tools to integrate and share data with these common data environments. Again, it removes silos and allows the data to flow. You know, I guess to finish, my message is quite a simple one, although the message might be simple, maybe the solution isn't. But when making a decision and selecting any business hardware, software, or software as a service, you've got to look for platforms which allow for connectivity, whether this is through APIs or through common data formats. It's imperative if we're going to maintain good collaboration, because the number of technologies in the marketplace is only going to increase as time goes on. So, thank you.